I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Somewhere, right now, your mind is still moving, replaying something that happened, turning over something that hasn't happened yet. And yet here you are. That quiet pull towards stillness. That's not weakness. That's the wisest part of you, asking for something it already knows you need. Tonight, you'll discover what researchers and philosophers have quietly been uncovering for decades about the nature of inner peace, and understand why the answer has been closer than you thought. Welcome to Sleepy Science. Wherever you are right now, perhaps lying in the dark with your thoughts still whispering at the edges, allow yourself to settle in. We'll explore 100 sleepy facts about inner peace, from the biology of a mind at rest to the ancient patterns of calm that live inside every human nervous system, to the quiet place just beneath the noise where peace has always waited. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. You're resting where stillness lives, just beneath the noise. Let your mind soften with each breath. And now we begin. So many people are searching for this tonight, lying awake, wondering why calm feels so far away. A gentle subscribe helps us reach another restless mind and guide them here too. Together we do this one sleepy soul at a time. The question of inner peace is one of the oldest in human history, and science is only now beginning to answer it with precision. For most of recorded history, calm was considered a spiritual achievement, something earned through devotion or discipline. But in recent decades, neuroscientists and psychologists have begun mapping what actually happens inside the brain and body of a person at peace. What they found was quietly profound. Inner peace is not the absence of thought. Research now suggests it is a measurable neurological state, one characterized by low activity in the brain's threat detection centers and high connectivity between its reasoning and emotional regulation regions. Peace is not emptiness. It is balance. And balance, it turns out, is something the brain already knows how to find. What is the key to inner peace? We begin tonight by asking what peace actually is. The brain's default mode network, a cluster of regions active during rest, self-reflection, and mind-wandering, plays a central role in whether a person feels peaceful or restless. When this network operates in a balanced, low-arousal way, people report feeling calm, grounded, and present. When it becomes overactive and begins looping through past regrets or future worries, it produces the signature feeling of a mind that simply will not stop. Neuroscientists sometimes call this rumination, the brain's version of a washing machine stuck on the same cycle. This network isn't a flaw. It evolved to help us plan, reflect, and understand ourselves. The trouble comes when it runs without a pause. The first step toward inner peace may simply be learning to notice when the loop has started, and gently, without judgment, letting it slow. The amygdala, two small almond-shaped structures deep in the brain, acts as the nervous system's threat alarm. When it detects danger, real or imagined, it triggers the body's stress response. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, tightened muscles. What many people don't realize is that the amygdala cannot always tell the difference between a genuine threat and a worried thought. A vivid memory of an argument, or an imagined conversation that hasn't happened yet, can activate the same alarm as an actual danger. This is why anxious thinking feels physical, because it is. The body responds to the mind's stories as if they were real. Inner peace begins when the amygdala quiets. And studies consistently show that the most reliable way to quiet it is not to fight the thoughts, but to gently redirect attention toward the breath, the body, the present room. Cortisol, often called the stress hormone, moves through the body on a natural daily rhythm. It peaks in the early morning to help with alertness, and ideally falls by evening so the body can transition into rest. But chronic worry and unresolved mental tension can flatten this rhythm, keeping cortisol elevated well into the night. Research published in psychoneuroendocrinology journals has found that people with consistently high evening cortisol report poorer sleep quality, lower feelings of well-being, and a reduced sense of calm. The good news is that this rhythm is responsive. Simple practices, slow breathing before bed, a few minutes of quiet, even gentle stretching, have been shown to lower evening cortisol within days of consistent use. The body wants to find the rhythm of rest. It simply needs the right conditions. The parasympathetic nervous system, often called the rest and digest system, is the biological opposite of the fight or flight response. When it activates, heart rate slows, digestion resumes, muscles soften, and the brain shifts toward a quieter mode of operation. Inner peace, physiologically speaking, is largely a parasympathetic state. What's interesting is that we can intentionally activate this system. It doesn't require years of meditation or any special technique. Slow exhalation, breathing out longer than you breathe in, directly stimulates the vagus nerve, which carries signals between the brain and body. This single act, exhaling slowly and fully, can shift the body toward calm within a matter of breaths. The nervous system is not fixed. It is always listening, waiting for a signal that it is safe to soften. The vagus nerve is one of the longest nerves in the body, running from the brainstem down through the heart, has lungs and abdomen. It is the primary pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system, and researchers have come to see it as a kind of peacemaking wire, carrying calm signals in both directions between the brain and the body. A concept called vagal tone describes how well this nerve functions. Higher vagal tone is associated with greater emotional resilience, faster recovery from stress, better sleep, and more consistent feelings of calm. Lower vagal tone is linked to anxiety, poor sleep, and difficulty self-regulating. The notable thing is that vagal tone can be improved through slow rhythmic breathing, gentle movement, cold water on the face, even humming. The capacity for peace is not fixed at birth. It is something we can quietly cultivate. Slow, controlled breathing is among the most thoroughly studied non-pharmacological interventions for anxiety and restlessness. Research published in Frontiers in Psychology suggests that weeks of daily slow breathing practice, roughly 5 to 6 breath cycles per minute, can produce measurable reductions in anxiety, lower resting heart rate, and improved subjective feelings of calm. The mechanism is elegant. Slow breathing entrains the heart rate into a gentle, rhythmic oscillation called heart rate variability, coherence. When the heart beats in this steady, wave-like pattern, the brain registers it as a signal of safety. It's as though the body is whispering to itself, "We are not in danger. We can rest." This signal travels upward through the vagus nerve and quiets the amygdala. Breathing slowly is not simply relaxing. At a neurological level, it is the body's most direct path back to peace. The ancient practice of meditation, long viewed by Western medicine as purely philosophical, has in recent decades become one of the most studied interventions in cognitive neuroscience. Brain imaging studies consistently show that experienced meditators have measurably different brain structure and function compared to non-meditators. The prefrontal cortex, associated with calm deliberation and emotional regulation, tends to be thicker. The amygdala tends to be smaller and less reactive. The connection between these two regions tends to be stronger. What this tells us is that the brain is plastic. It physically reshapes itself in response to how we use it. Repeated practice of inner stillness, whatever form it takes, leaves a structural trace. Peace, in this sense, is not just a feeling. It is something the brain slowly learns to hold. Mindfulness, the practice of paying deliberate, non-judgmental attention to present moment experience, reduces activity in the default mode network, the region responsible for mind-wandering and self-referential rumination. A widely cited study from Harvard University found that participants spent nearly 47% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they were currently doing, and that this mind-wandering was associated with lower reported happiness, regardless of the activity. What this suggests is that the content of our thoughts matters less than we assume. It is the act of presence itself, of being genuinely here, that creates the conditions for calm. Inner peace may be less about what we think, and more about where our attention is resting at any given moment. Something is already becoming clear. Inner peace is not a destination the mind reaches after solving all its problems. It is a quality of attention, a particular way of being with whatever is present. Researchers studying well-being across cultures have found that this insight appears in traditions spanning thousands of years. Buddhist teachings describe it as equanimity, a stable awareness that neither clings to pleasant experience nor pushes away unpleasant ones. Stoic philosophers called it tranquility, a calm indifference to what lies beyond our control. Modern positive psychology calls it psychological flexibility. Different names, different frameworks, but the underlying pattern is strikingly consistent. Peace is not the removal of difficulty. It is a changed relationship with difficulty. And that relationship can be learned. The concept of acceptance, genuinely allowing an experience to be what it is, without fighting it or demanding it be different, has become one of the most robust predictors of psychological well-being in clinical research. Acceptance does not mean approval, or resignation, or giving up. It means ceasing the internal war against what is already true. Counterintuitively, it is the resistance to an unpleasant feeling, the tensing against it, the need for it to stop, that tends to amplify that feeling. Acceptance, by contrast, often reduces the intensity of difficult emotions simply by removing the layer of struggle around them. Therapists working with acceptance-based approaches observe this regularly. The moment a person stops fighting their anxiety and simply allows it to be there, it begins, quietly and somewhat mysteriously, to loosen. The relationship between inner peace and sleep is bidirectional. Each enables the other. Research from the University of California, Berkeley, has found that sleep, particularly the slow-wave deep sleep stage, actively resets the brain's emotional state. During this stage, the amygdala's reactivity is calibrated downward, and the prefrontal cortex's regulatory capacity is restored. People who sleep well are measurably calmer, more patient, and better able to tolerate frustration the following day. And people who are calmer fall asleep more easily, entering deeper sleep stages more readily, cultivating even small pockets of daytime calm, a few minutes of quiet breathing, a moment of deliberate stillness, can improve the quality of sleep. And improved sleep, in turn, deepens the capacity for inner peace the next day. Gratitude, the deliberate recognition of what is already good or sufficient, is one of the simplest and most consistently supported interventions in positive psychology. Studies using brain imaging have found that generating feelings of gratitude activates the medial prefrontal cortex and reduces activity in the brain's stress response systems. Gratitude appears to work, in part, by redirecting attention. The mind has a well-documented negativity bias. It naturally notices threats, problems, and gaps more readily than it notices what is working or present or beautiful. Gratitude gently counteracts this bias, not by denying difficulty, but by widening the lens. People who practice even a few minutes of deliberate gratitude before sleep report falling asleep faster and feeling more rested in the morning. A small act with a quietly wide reach. Nature exposure. Time spent in green spaces, near water, or under open sky consistently reduces markers of physiological stress. Studies measuring cortisol levels, blood pressure, and heart rate variability have found measurable improvements after as little as 20 to 30 minutes in natural settings. A research group in Japan studying Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, or simply being present in a forest, documented reductions in cortisol after single sessions. The proposed mechanism involves multiple pathways. The fractal visual patterns of natural environments calm the visual cortex. Natural sounds engage the parasympathetic system, and the reduced cognitive demands of natural settings allow the prefrontal cortex to rest. The natural world is not merely pleasant. For the nervous system, it appears to be genuinely restorative. Forgiveness of others, and perhaps more powerfully, of oneself, has been linked to measurable improvements in both mental and physical health. Chronic resentment, research shows, maintains a low-grade activation of the stress response system. The body experiences held grudges as ongoing threats, even when the original source of harm is long past. Studies published in behavioral medicine journals have found that people who practice forgiveness, genuinely releasing the demand that the past should have been different, show lower blood pressure, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and higher reported life satisfaction. Forgiveness is not a gift given to the person who caused harm. It is a form of self-release, the closing of a loop that the nervous system has been keeping open, at a cost, for far too long. The body holds emotion in a literal, physiological sense. Stress, grief, chronic worry, These are not merely mental events. They are stored as patterns of muscular tension, altered breathing, changed posture. This is part of why purely cognitive approaches to inner peace, thinking our way to calm, so often feel incomplete. The body needs to be included. Progressive muscle relaxation, a technique developed in the 1920s by physician Edmund Jacobson, works by systematically tensing and releasing muscle groups throughout the body. Clinical trials have consistently found it reduces anxiety, improves sleep quality, and lowers resting heart rate. The act of tensing a muscle deliberately and then releasing it teaches the nervous system the difference between tension and ease. It is a gentle reminder of what the body already knows about letting go. Solitude, genuine, voluntary time alone, is associated with psychological restoration and increased capacity for inner peace, provided it is entered willingly rather than imposed. Research from the University of Rochester has found that people who regularly choose to spend time alone report higher levels of creativity, better emotional self-regulation, and a deeper sense of personal meaning. The key distinction is agency. Lonely isolation and chosen solitude produce opposite psychological effects, even when the external circumstances look similar. In solitude, the mind has space to process unresolved experiences, to notice what it actually feels, and to settle without the constant demand to respond to others. For many people living in relentlessly social environments, a few minutes of genuine aloneness each day is not an indulgence. It may be a quiet form of maintenance. The relationship between inner peace and a sense of meaning or purpose is one of the most reliable findings in well-being research. People who report having a clear sense of what matters to them, not grand ambitions necessarily, but any orientation toward something beyond the immediate moment, consistently score higher on measures of calm, resilience, and life satisfaction. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who developed logotherapy, proposed that the human capacity to find meaning in any circumstances, even suffering, was the foundation of psychological well-being. Decades of research since have supported this. Meaning functions as a kind of internal anchor. When the mind has somewhere to return to, it wanders less. When it wanders less, it finds it somewhat easier, each time, to rest. The concept of psychological safety, the felt sense that one is not in danger, that mistakes are tolerable, that the world is basically manageable, is a precondition for inner peace rather than a consequence of it. When this sense is absent, the nervous system remains in a low-level vigilance state, scanning, bracing, preparing for difficulty. Attachment research has found that people who experienced consistent, reliable caregiving early in life tend to carry a baseline sense of internal safety into adulthood. But this is not fixed. Adults can develop what researchers call earned security, a genuine experience of safety built through trusted relationships, therapy, or consistent self-compassion practice. The nervous system learns safety the same way it learns anything, through repetition, through the slow accumulation of moments in which the feared thing does not happen. Self-compassion, treating oneself with the same warmth and understanding one might offer a close friend during difficulty, is one of the most reliably documented predictors of psychological well-being. Researcher Kristin Neff, who pioneered the scientific study of self-compassion, has found across dozens of studies that people with higher self-compassion report lower anxiety, less rumination, greater emotional resilience, and more consistent inner peace. Importantly, self-compassion is not the same as self-esteem. Self-esteem depends on outcomes. It rises when things go well and falls when they don't. Self-compassion is stable. It extends the same basic warmth regardless of performance or results. It asks only one question: would I speak this way to someone I loved? And if the answer is no, it invites a gentler voice instead. The role of the body in generating peaceful states is increasingly recognized in clinical psychology. Research on embodied cognition, the idea that the mind and body are not separate systems but one integrated whole, has found that posture, gesture, and even facial expression feed back into emotional experience. Studies have found that people who adopt open, relaxed postures during stressful tasks report lower subjective distress, even when the tasks are identical to those done while hunched or braced. This works through interoception, the brain's ongoing sensing of the body's internal state. When the body signals ease, the brain registers it, slowing the breath, softening the jaw, allowing the shoulders to drop. These are not merely cosmetic changes. For the nervous system, they are information. Sleep itself is one of the most direct pathways to the restoration of inner peace. And yet, it is precisely when peace feels most absent that sleep becomes most difficult. This paradox has been studied extensively. Research has found that the cognitive arousal associated with worry, the active, ruminative quality of an anxious mind, is neurologically incompatible with the passive deactivation required for sleep onset. The mind cannot be simultaneously busy and falling asleep. One of the most effective interventions for this paradox is called cognitive shuffling, a technique developed by researchers in sleep science that involves generating a random sequence of unrelated, neutral images. By giving the mind something too disconnected to narrative, it disrupts the loop of worried thought and allows the brain to drift toward sleep more naturally. The glymphatic system, the brain's waste clearance network, is most active during deep sleep. During these quiet hours, cerebrospinal fluid flows through channels around blood vessels, flushing out metabolic byproducts that accumulate during waking hours. Animal studies have demonstrated this process clearly, and emerging human research suggests a similar mechanism at work. Among the substances cleared is beta amyloid, a protein associated with cognitive decline when it builds up over time. What this means is that sleep is not passive. It is a form of active maintenance, a nightly reset that prepares the brain not only to function the following day, but to remain healthy over years and decades. The mind that finds rest is not simply recovering from the day. It is, in some important sense, being prepared. Research on the neuroscience of compassion has found that generating feelings of warmth or kindness toward others activates the insular and anterior cingulate cortex, brain regions associated with empathy, connection, and positive affect. Loving kindness meditation, a practice that involves silently wishing well-being to oneself and others, has been shown in multiple clinical trials to reduce anxiety, increase positive emotion, and improve sleep quality. The benefits appear even when the practice is brief, as little as 7 minutes. The brain responds to the act of wishing well. There is no requirement that the feeling be deeply sincere at first. The practice itself, repeated gently, tends to generate the feeling over time. Kindness, turned quietly inward, is one of the softer roads to peace. Halfway through our first act tonight, a pattern is already visible. Inner peace does not belong to any single practice or tradition. It is not owned by meditation or philosophy or medicine. It emerges, researchers suggest, from a particular orientation, a willingness to be present, to accept, to soften, to rest. Every nervous system carries this capacity. Every brain has the architecture for calm. What varies is not the potential, but the conditions. And conditions, unlike nature, can change. What is the key to inner peace? The evidence points toward this. The key is not something you find. It is something you return to, again and again, in small ways, in ordinary moments, just like this one. You've been with us for a while now, and your breathing has likely softened without you noticing. A soft subscribe helps another sleepless mind find this sanctuary too. Now, let's pause together, one sleepy soul at a time. Let's pause here and notice your body. As you breathe out slowly, appreciate each tiny cell inside. Trillions of processes working in silence. Heart beating, lungs breathing, brain gently settling, all without your command. Notice the gentle sensations on your skin, in your muscles, along your spine. Feel the weight of you, the quiet solidity. You are a complete system, always tending toward balance. Now we continue. The relationship between physical movement and inner peace is one of the most consistent findings in behavioral medicine. Aerobic exercise, walking, swimming, cycling, any sustained rhythmic movement produces a cascade of neurochemical changes that reduce anxiety and promote calm. Among these is an increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports neural plasticity and is associated with improved mood and reduced rumination. Even a single session of moderate exercise has been shown to reduce anxiety for up to several hours afterward. Researchers believe this works through multiple mechanisms: the discharge of accumulated muscular tension, the regulation of cortisol, and the shift in attentional focus that movement naturally produces. The restless mind, given a body in motion, often finds it somewhat easier to quiet. The concept of flow, described by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi as the state of complete absorption in a challenging, meaningful activity, produces a subjective experience that closely resembles inner peace, though it arrives through engagement rather than stillness. During flow, self-consciousness fades. The internal critic quiets. Time seems to compress or expand. Research on flow states has found that they are associated with reduced activity in the default mode network, the same quieting seen in meditation. The activities that produce flow vary widely. Writing, cooking, playing music, gardening, repairing something with your hands. What they share is genuine absorption, a task demanding enough to hold full attention, but not so overwhelming as to produce anxiety. The peace of flow is not the peace of rest, but it is peace nonetheless. Social connection, genuine, unhurried contact with people one trusts, is one of the most powerful regulators of the nervous system. Research from the field of interpersonal neurobiology has found that face-to-face interaction with a calm, trusted person can directly reduce amygdala activity. The presence of a safe other, someone who listens without judgment, who is simply and steadily there, communicates safety to the nervous system in ways that no amount of self-talk can fully replicate. This is why loneliness, even when accompanied by no other difficulty, is so corrosive to inner peace. And it is why moments of genuine connection, even brief ones, can produce a calm that lingers well beyond the interaction itself. We are not designed for peace in isolation alone. We find it, partly, together. The phenomenon of emotional contagion, the unconscious transfer of emotional states between people, means that the calm or anxiety of those around us genuinely influences our own nervous system state. Research using physiological measures has found that people's heart rates, cortisol levels, and skin conductance patterns tend to synchronize with those of people they spend time with. This happens below conscious awareness, through neural mirroring processes and through subtle cues in voice tone, posture, and facial expression. The practical implication is quiet but significant. The emotional state of the people we spend the most time with is not irrelevant to our own capacity for peace. This is not a reason for judgment. It is simply an acknowledgement that calm, like everything else in human experience, is partly something we share. The practice of journaling, writing freely and honestly about inner experience, has been studied as an intervention for anxiety, trauma, and chronic stress by psychologist James Pennebaker over several decades. His findings have been remarkably consistent. People who write about their deepest thoughts and feelings surrounding difficult experiences show measurable improvements in immune function, reduced anxiety, fewer medical visits, and improved sleep quality. The mechanism appears to involve the transformation of unprocessed emotional experience into narrative, giving shape and sequence to what previously felt formless and overwhelming. The act of writing does not remove the difficulty, but it changes its texture. What was previously a storm of feeling becomes a story with a beginning, a middle, and the possibility of an end. Digital technology, particularly the constant availability of notifications, news, and social comparison, has been identified by researchers as one of the primary modern obstacles to inner peace. Studies on smartphone use and well-being consistently find that higher screen time, especially before sleep, is associated with lower reported calm, greater anxiety, and poorer sleep quality. The mechanism is partly neurological. The variable reward structure of social media and news feeds activates dopamine-seeking pathways, creating a seeking loop that is difficult for the nervous system to settle out of. Researchers now recommend what some call attentional hygiene, deliberate management of when and how we engage with digital stimulation, particularly in the hours before sleep. The mind that is constantly fed cannot easily find stillness. Stillness requires some degree of quiet input. The ancient philosophical tradition of Stoicism, developed in Greece in the 3rd century before the Common Era, and later refined by thinkers including Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, built its entire framework around a single insight. Some things are within our control, and many things are not. The Stoics called the boundary between these two categories the dichotomy of control, and they argued that suffering, in large part, arises from mistaking the second category for the first. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, developed nearly 2,000 years later, arrived at strikingly similar conclusions. Much of what drives chronic anxiety is the futile attempt to control outcomes that were never ours to begin with. The quiet release of that attempt, not as defeat, but as clarity, is one of the most enduring pathways to inner peace. The experience of awe, wonder at something vast, beautiful, or beyond ordinary comprehension, has been found in recent research to produce measurable reductions in anxiety and self-focused thought. Studies, led by researcher Dacher Keltner at the University of California, Berkeley, found that people who regularly experience awe report lower levels of inflammation, more pro-social behavior, and greater subjective well-being. Awe appears to work through what researchers call the small self effect. In the presence of something genuinely vast, a night sky, a mountain range, a cathedral, an ocean, the self shrinks to a more accurate size, and with it, the urgency of personal worry. The problems that felt pressing a moment before still exist, but they exist within something so much larger that their weight, briefly, shifts. Research on the relationship between inner peace and financial security reveals a nuanced picture. Money does reduce stress, but primarily when it addresses genuine scarcity. A landmark study by economist Angus Deaton and psychologist Daniel Kahneman found that beyond a moderate income threshold sufficient to meet basic needs, additional wealth produces diminishing returns on day-to-day emotional well-being. What this suggests is that inner peace, beyond a baseline of security, is largely independent of material circumstance. This is not a comfortable finding for a culture organized largely around the pursuit of more, but it is a consistent one. The wealthy are not, on average, more peaceful than the merely comfortable. Peace lives somewhere that money cannot quite reach, and somewhere that most people, in quieter moments, already suspect. The science of sleep staging reveals that the transition into sleep is itself a form of inner peace. The brain enacts automatically, given the right conditions. As we drift from wakefulness towards sleep, the brain passes through a stage called hypnagogia, a liminal state characterized by loosened self-monitoring, fluid imagery, and reduced critical thought. In this state, the mind is neither fully awake nor asleep. Thoughts arise and dissolve without the usual sense of urgency. The internal editor quiets. Researchers studying this state have found that it shares many features with the mindful awareness described by experienced meditators, including reduced default mode network activity, increased alpha brainwave presence, and a characteristic feeling of spacious, unhurried attention. Every night, in the moments before sleep takes hold, the brain already knows how to find peace. The practice of Tai Chi, a slow, flowing series of movements developed in China and practiced as both a martial art and a meditative exercise, has been studied in dozens of clinical trials as an intervention for anxiety, sleep disturbance, and chronic stress. Meta-analyses of this research consistently find significant improvements across all three measures. Tai Chi appears to work through several simultaneous pathways. The slow, deliberate movement calms the nervous system. The required attention to body position pulls awareness away from ruminative thought. And the rhythmic, repetitive quality activates the same neural quieting seen in other forms of meditation. It is one of the more elegant demonstrations of an insight the research keeps returning to. The mind follows the body. A body moving slowly and with intention tends to take the mind somewhere gentler. Research on the psychological effects of music has found that slow-tempo music, particularly in the range of 60 beats per minute or below, reliably reduces heart rate, lowers blood pressure, and shifts the autonomic nervous system toward parasympathetic dominance. This effect appears across cultures and musical traditions, suggesting it is less about style and more about tempo and rhythm. The brain entrains to rhythmic input, synchronizing its own patterns to the patterns it perceives in the environment. This is why music played at a tempo close to resting heart rate can feel so profoundly calming. The body begins to follow the rhythm it hears. Many people instinctively reach for slow music when they need to settle. The science simply confirms what experience has long quietly understood: the relationship between inner peace and a regular daily rhythm, consistent sleep and wake times, regular meals, predictable patterns, is supported by research on circadian biology. The body's circadian system, governed by a cluster of cells in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, coordinates not only sleep but mood regulation, cortisol release, immune function, and emotional reactivity. When this rhythm is disrupted by irregular schedules, shift work, or social jet lag, all of these downstream systems are affected. People living in greater alignment with their natural circadian rhythm consistently report higher well-being and more emotional stability. The nervous system finds ease in predictability. A consistent daily rhythm is not merely a lifestyle preference. It is one of the quiet foundations on which peace rests. The practice of loving-kindness meditation extended toward difficult people, including those who have caused harm, is among the more counterintuitive findings in well-being research. Studies have found that people who practice wishing well-being toward those they resent show accelerated recovery from negative emotion and reduced physiological arousal when thinking about the difficult person. The practice does not require approval or reconciliation. It is, at its core, a self-directed practice, one that changes the internal state of the person practicing it, regardless of the person it is directed toward. Resentment requires ongoing energy to maintain. It keeps neural threat detection systems mildly activated, as though the source of the original harm might return. Releasing that vigilance, even partially, frees something the nervous system has been quietly spending. This evidence suggests, now at the midpoint of our first arc tonight, that inner peace has no single address. It lives in the breath and in the body, in the quality of attention and the gentleness of self-regard, in how we spend our time and what we choose to let go of. It is available to the nervous system of any person who creates the conditions that allow it to surface. The conditions are many, and they are ordinary. They are available tonight, in a room, in a bed, in the quiet dark, in the simple act of breathing slowly and letting the mind be where it already is. What is the key to inner peace? The answer is not dramatic. It never was. You're still here with me. Thoughts still flickering like candlelight. Just notice. Don't judge. Just notice where your mind is. We're exploring the very nature of calm, the thing doing the exploring right now. Strange, beautiful, and perfectly at ease. Let's drift onward together. Chronic pain and inner peace might seem incompatible, and yet research consistently finds that acceptance-based approaches to pain management, not fighting the pain, but allowing it to be present without adding layers of resistance, reduce subjective suffering significantly without changing the underlying physical sensation. Studies on mindfulness-based stress reduction applied to chronic pain found that participants reported meaningful reductions in pain-related distress, improved sleep, and higher quality of life, even when pain intensity remained unchanged. This finding points to something profound. A large portion of suffering is not the sensation itself, but the relationship to it. The narrative around the sensation, it shouldn't be here. Something is wrong. It will never end, generates its own additional layer of difficulty. Releasing that narrative, gently and without demand, can ease more than expected. The concept of impermanence, the recognition that all experience, pleasant and unpleasant, is temporary, appears across virtually every contemplative tradition that has studied inner peace. Modern psychology has begun to study this concept empirically. Research has found that people who hold a greater awareness of impermanence, who genuinely accept that the present moment, both its pleasures and its difficulties, will pass, report lower anxiety, greater emotional resilience, and more consistent well-being. The mechanism appears to involve reduced emotional reactivity. When a person knows at a deep level that this too shall pass, the urgency of the current moment softens. Difficult states feel less permanent. Pleasant ones are held with greater savoring rather than desperate clinging. Impermanence, understood rather than feared, becomes one of the quieter companions of peace. The neuroscience of decision fatigue reveals that the sheer number of choices a person makes in a day depletes the same cognitive and emotional resources needed for inner peace. Studies on decision fatigue have found that as the number of decisions accumulates, even trivial ones, judgment worsens, emotional regulation decreases, and feelings of overwhelm increase. This partly explains why simpler, more predictable days tend to feel calmer, reducing the number of minor decisions through routines, defaults, and deliberate simplification, preserves cognitive resources for the moments that genuinely require them. The mind at peace is not necessarily a mind with fewer problems. It is often simply a mind that has been protected from unnecessary expenditure. Simplicity, in this sense, is not an aesthetic preference. It is a form of care. Research on the effects of temperature on sleep and calm has found that a cooler sleeping environment, around 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, supports both faster sleep onset and deeper slow-wave sleep. This is because the body naturally drops its core temperature during the transition to sleep, a process that signals the brain to shift toward rest. A warm environment counteracts this drop, keeping the nervous system more alert. The relationship between physical comfort and inner peace is not incidental. The body's basic needs, adequate warmth, coolness when needed, absence of pain, sufficient rest, form the foundation on which all higher experiences of calm must rest. Peace that ignores the body's needs is not peace. It is suppression. True ease begins at the most ordinary physical level. The role of the gut-brain axis in emotional regulation is an area of growing scientific interest. The gut contains approximately 100 million neurons and produces more than 90% of the body's serotonin, a neurotransmitter central to mood regulation and sleep. Research has found bidirectional communication between the gut microbiome and the brain via the vagus nerve and immune pathways. Disruptions to gut microbiota through diet, stress, or antibiotics have been associated with increased anxiety and mood instability. Conversely, a diverse, well-supported gut microbiome has been linked to more stable mood and better sleep. This suggests that the path to inner peace, in some cases, runs through something as ordinary as what we eat, a finding that makes the body's quieter wisdom feel closer than ever. The Japanese concept of ma, often translated as negative space, or the pause between things, offers a cultural framework for understanding peace that differs meaningfully from Western conceptions. In Japanese aesthetics, the empty space in a painting is not an absence. It is an active presence. The pause in music is not silence. It is sound's companion. Ma suggests that peace is not found by filling every moment, but by cultivating the quality of what exists between actions, between thoughts, between breaths. This concept has influenced architecture, music, and daily life across Japanese culture, and resonates with findings from contemplative neuroscience. It is in the spaces between stimulus and response that the capacity for choice and for peace most fully lives. Research on humor and laughter as regulators of the stress response system has found that genuine laughter produces measurable reductions in cortisol and adrenaline, increases in endorphins and dopamine, and improved immune markers. Laughter is, physiologically, a form of stress discharge, a brief, intense activation of the nervous system that produces a calming rebound effect. People who laugh more regularly recover from stresses more quickly and report higher baseline well-being. The relationship between humor and inner peace is not that one produces the other. It is that both emerge from the same orientation. An ability to hold difficulty lightly, to find the absurdity within the serious, to step back just far enough that the weight of things shifts slightly. Laughter is one of the more joyful expressions of that shift. The experience of grief, genuinely felt and allowed to move through rather than suppressed, has been identified in research as an unlikely but important pathway to inner peace. Grief counselor and researcher David Kessler, building on the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, has proposed that meaning-making is a final stage of grief that follows acceptance, one in which loss is not diminished but integrated into a larger understanding of one's life. Research on post-traumatic growth has found that a significant proportion of people who experience serious loss or trauma report, over time, increased compassion, greater appreciation for life, and a deepened sense of meaning. Difficulty, genuinely faced rather than avoided, can become the material from which something quietly spacious is eventually made. The clinical concept of equanimity, a term borrowed from both Stoic philosophy and Buddhist practice, has been operationalized by researchers as a measurable psychological trait. The capacity to face pleasant and unpleasant experience with the same underlying stability. People who score high on equanimity measures show lower physiological reactivity to stressors, faster recovery to baseline after emotional events, and higher reported well-being over time. What distinguishes equanimity from emotional suppression is important. Suppression involves not feeling. Equanimity involves feeling fully, but not being destabilized by what is felt. It is the capacity to be moved without being swept away. Researchers now view equanimity as something that can be cultivated through practice, through exposure, through the slow and patient relationship with one's own inner weather. Halfway through our journey tonight, the answer to the central question is becoming less like a single key and more like a door that opens gradually, from many directions at once. Inner peace is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, in the softened breath, in the easing of a held muscle, in the moment a thought is noticed and allowed to pass without being followed. What is the key to inner peace? It is, at this halfway point, something closer to a practice than a discovery, something returned to, rather than found. And the returning, the research suggests, gets easier each time. The door becomes familiar, the threshold lower, the path, over time, shorter. And imagine, even when everything seems empty, there is always something present. The space inside you is never truly empty. There is always movement, the breath rising, the heart pulsing, the quiet hum of a body at rest. Imagine you're floating on still water. Beneath the surface, a gentle current. Nothing pulling you anywhere. Just the soft sensation of being held. Now we continue the journey. The phenomenon of neuroplasticity, the brain's lifelong capacity to physically reorganize in response to experience, means that the quality of inner peace available to any person is not fixed. Every repeated moment of deliberate stillness, every practiced breath, every chosen act of self-compassion leaves a trace in the brain's structure. Researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital have found that 8 weeks of regular mindfulness practice produces measurable thickening of the prefrontal cortex and measurable shrinkage of the amygdala. The brain does not merely experience peace. It learns it. It changes to hold it more easily. This means that the person who finds calm easier at 60 than at 30 has not been lucky. They have been practicing, in ways large and small, all along. Ancient Stoic practice included a daily exercise called the evening review, a quiet reflection at the end of each day on what went well, what could have gone better, and what, if anything, needed to be released. Modern positive psychology has studied similar practices and found that brief, structured reflection before sleep, not rumination, but deliberate, compassionate review, improves sleep quality, reduces unprocessed anxiety, and increases feelings of completion and calm. The mind that has been given a chance to gently close the day tends to sleep more soundly than the one carrying open loops into the dark. A few minutes of quiet reflection, not judgment, not analysis, just acknowledgement, can be one of the most ordinary and most effective peace practices available. The concept of Wu Wei from Taoist philosophy, often translated as effortless action or non-forcing, describes a mode of being in which one acts in alignment with the natural flow of circumstances rather than against them. It is not passivity. It is the absence of unnecessary resistance. Research on psychological acceptance has found a functional parallel. People who score high on acceptance measures, who can allow circumstances to be as they are while still taking thoughtful action, report lower anxiety and more sustainable engagement with their lives. Wu Wei is not giving up. It is the recognition that much of our suffering comes not from difficulties themselves, but from the sustained effort to make them different from what they already are. The rhythm of tidal breathing, the ordinary breath cycle at rest, naturally slows as the body approaches sleep. Resting breath rate typically falls from 14 to 18 breaths per minute in wakefulness to 10 to 12 during light sleep, and further still in deep sleep. This slowing is not only a consequence of calm. Research suggests it is also a cause. Deliberately slowing the breath to 6 breaths per minute, or even to 8, activates the same physiological cascade that natural sleep induces. Falling heart rate, dropping cortisol, quieting amygdala. The breath is the most accessible lever available to the nervous system. It requires no equipment, and has been used as a pathway to peace by human beings across every culture and every century. The experience of being truly listened to, heard without advice, without redirection, without judgment, has been found in research to produce measurable reductions in stress hormones and improvements in subjective well-being. Psychotherapist Carl Rogers proposed that this quality of listening, which he called unconditional positive regard, was itself therapeutic, independent of any technique or intervention. Decades of research have supported this. The nervous system responds to being genuinely witnessed with something approaching relief. It is as if the act of having one's experience acknowledged, simply acknowledged, allows it to settle. This is one of the reasons that speaking about difficulty, even without resolution, often leaves people feeling lighter. Being heard is one of the oldest medicines. The practice of body scanning, systematically directing attention through different regions of the body, noticing without judgment what is present, has been shown in clinical trials to reduce anxiety, improve sleep quality, and lower physiological stress markers. It works, in part, because it moves attention from abstract thought to direct physical sensation. Thoughts about the future and past exist in language and narrative. Sensations exist only in the present moment. By moving awareness into the body, the mind is gently drawn out of time, away from yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's uncertainties, and into the only place where peace can actually be experienced. Here, now, in this breathing body. Research on the nature of worry has found that the vast majority of things people worry about either do not occur or occur in ways they were able to handle. Research published in behavioral psychology journals found that approximately 91% of worry predictions in people with generalized anxiety did not come true as feared. Of the 9% that did, the majority resolved better than anticipated. This does not mean worry is irrational. The mind worries because it is trying to protect. But it does suggest that the alarm the worried mind generates is frequently disproportionate to actual outcomes. Knowing this, gently and without self-judgment, is one of the quieter forms of permission to let the mind rest. The concept of beginner's mind, a term from Zen Buddhism describing the quality of openness and freshness with which a beginner encounters any situation, has been found in positive psychology research to correlate with well-being, creativity, and inner peace. When a person approaches familiar situations as if they were new, without the overlay of assumption, judgment, or habit, the brain engages differently. Neural novelty responses activate. Attention sharpens. The ordinary becomes, briefly, interesting. This quality of fresh perception is not only more pleasant than habituation, it appears to be protective against the kind of resigned, contracted worldview that often accompanies chronic stress. Seeing clearly, rather than through the accumulation of old conclusions, keeps the mind a little more open and a little more at ease. The neurobiology of hope, the felt sense that positive outcomes are possible, even without certainty, is increasingly studied as a distinct psychological resource. Hope activates pathways in the prefrontal cortex associated with goal-directed behavior and positive anticipation, and appears to buffer against the learned helplessness that deepens depression and anxiety. Importantly, hope is not optimism. Optimism is a belief that things will work out. Hope is the capacity to keep moving toward what matters even without that belief, to act despite uncertainty rather than because of confidence. Research on hope as a clinical intervention has found it reliably increases psychological resilience. The mind that holds hope, even quietly and without drama, tends to find peace somewhat easier to reach. The practice of walking, particularly slow, deliberate walking, has a long history as a meditative practice across multiple traditions. Research comparing sitting meditation with walking meditation has found that both produce similar reductions in anxiety and improvements in well-being, with walking offering additional benefits through physical movement and rhythmic sensory input. The gentle repetition of steps, the sensation of ground beneath the feet, the slight rhythm of arms in motion, these anchor attention in the present moment, in much the same way that following the breath does during seated practice. The mind tends to wander less when the body is gently occupied. Slow walking is one of the more accessible forms of peace, available to anyone with the space to take a few quiet steps. Cross-cultural research on the nature of inner peace has found that while the specific practices and frameworks vary widely, a small cluster of qualities appears universally associated with calm. These include the ability to accept uncertainty, the capacity for self-compassion, some quality of present moment awareness, and a sense of connection to others, to nature, to something larger than the self. What is striking about this list is not what is on it. It is what is absent. Achievement is not on the list. Status is not on the list. Neither is wealth, intelligence, or certainty about the future. The universal markers of inner peace are relational and attentional qualities, ways of being present, rather than things one has acquired. The biology of tears, specifically emotional weeping, includes a measurable stress reduction component. Research has found that emotional tears contain higher concentrations of stress hormones than irritant-caused tears, suggesting that crying is one of the body's mechanisms for releasing accumulated biochemical tension. People who cry during or after difficult emotional experiences consistently report feeling calmer and more relieved afterward. The nervous system, when it is allowed to discharge through crying, returns more readily to baseline. There is wisdom in the body's response to grief and overwhelm. The tears that sometimes come unbidden in the quiet dark are not weakness. They are often the beginning of resolution. Research on the concept of psychological boundaries, the capacity to distinguish between what is one's own experience and what belongs to others, has found it to be central to sustainable inner peace. People with poorly developed boundaries tend to absorb the emotional states of those around them, to feel responsible for others' suffering, and to exhaust their own emotional resources in service of managing situations they cannot control. Learning to identify where one's own experience ends and another's begins is not a selfish act. It is, researchers suggest, a prerequisite for genuine compassion, because compassion that depletes cannot be sustained, and care offered from an empty place rarely helps anyone. The practice of deliberate rest taken not from exhaustion, but as a chosen, scheduled renewal, has been advocated by researchers studying high performance and creative work. Researcher and author Alex Soojung Kim Pang has documented through extensive case studies that many of history's most creative and productive individuals worked in focused bursts of 4 to 5 hours, with the remainder of the day spent in genuine rest. Walks, reading, conversation, sleep. Genuine rest made the work more focused, and focused work made the rest more complete. Peace, in this framework, is not a reward for completed effort. It is a condition that makes effort possible. We now understand that inner peace is neither passive nor achieved by subtraction alone. It is not the absence of thought, not the removal of difficulty, not the achievement of perfect circumstances. It is a quality maintained through active, gentle, repeated practice, through the small daily acts of returning to the breath, releasing resistance, choosing presence, and allowing rather than insisting. The research points, with unusual consistency, toward this. The people who report the most sustained inner peace are not those with the fewest problems. They are those who have, over time and through practice, developed a more spacious relationship with whatever problems they have. The key is not eliminating the noise. It is learning to rest even when the noise is still there. Research on the relationship between inner peace and identity has found that people with a more stable, integrated sense of who they are, what psychologists call identity coherence, report less anxiety and more consistent well-being. Identity coherence does not require certainty about every aspect of the self. It requires a basic narrative continuity, a sense that one's past, present, and values are connected, and that one is moving, however imperfectly, toward something that feels meaningful. When this coherence is disrupted by loss, transition, or sustained self-doubt, inner peace tends to destabilize with it. Practices that support a coherent sense of self, journaling, therapy, conversations with trusted others, are in a quieter sense. Peace-building work. The experience of chronic uncertainty, not knowing what will happen or whether things will be okay, is one of the most reliable sources of restlessness and anxiety in modern life. Research has found that uncertain outcomes can be more stressful to the nervous system than certain negative outcomes. The brain prefers a known difficult outcome to an unknown one, because the former can be prepared for, and the latter cannot. This insight illuminates much of modern anxiety. The antidote, researchers suggest, is not the achievement of certainty, which is rarely available, but the cultivation of a tolerance for not knowing, and a trust that one will manage whatever comes. This tolerance, practiced gradually, is one of the quieter foundations of peace. Research on awe and transcendence has found that experiences of being part of something larger than oneself, whether through nature, music, art, or spiritual practice, produce a reliably calming effect on the default mode network. The self-referential loops of worry, comparison, and planning that characterize an anxious mind are temporarily suspended in moments of genuine transcendence. This effect persists beyond the immediate experience. People who report regular experiences of awe maintain lower baseline levels of inflammatory markers and higher reported well-being, even on ordinary days. The nervous system that occasionally encounters something larger than itself seems to carry that spaciousness forward, as if having glimpsed the size of the whole. It is briefly less oppressed by the weight of its part. The concept of radical acceptance, introduced by psychologist Marsha Linehan and central to dialectical behavior therapy, takes acceptance further than most Western frameworks typically allow. Radical acceptance means acknowledging reality exactly as it is, without minimizing, denying, or attempting to negotiate with it. It does not mean agreeing with what is. It means ceasing to fight against the fact of what already exists. Linehan developed this concept largely through her own experience of suffering, and has described it as the turning point between a life that feels endurable and one that feels livable. Research on its clinical application has found it reduces emotional suffering significantly, not by changing circumstances, but by changing the relationship to what cannot be changed. The neuroscience of rest, as distinct from sleep, is a growing area of research. Studies using brain imaging have found that during genuine rest, even when the mind is wandering, the brain consolidates recent memories, integrates new learning, and performs emotional processing that cannot occur during active task engagement. Rest is not wasted time. It is necessary time, performing functions that work cannot. The mind that is never allowed to wander, never given space to do nothing in particular, tends to become rigid, reactive, and depleted. The space of doing nothing, genuinely and without guilt, is one of the most productive things a mind can do, and one of the quieter gifts it can give itself. Research on forgiveness of self, as distinct from forgiveness of others, has found it to be among the most potent interventions for chronic guilt, shame, and restless self-judgment. Many people who practice compassion toward others maintain an internal standard for themselves that would strike them as cruel if applied to someone they loved. Self-forgiveness does not involve denying that something went wrong, or releasing genuine accountability. It involves extending the same basic acknowledgement to oneself that one would offer to another. That imperfection is universal. That mistakes do not define a person. And that the suffering already experienced is sufficient. That nothing more needs to be added. The mind that can forgive itself finds rest somewhat easier to locate. The practice of spending time in genuine, chosen silence has been found in research to support neural growth and regenerative processes. Studies in animal models found that periods of silence produced measurable hippocampal neurogenesis, the growth of new cells in the brain region associated with memory and emotional regulation. While this research has not yet been fully replicated in human subjects, it aligns with a broader body of work, suggesting that quiet, like rest, is not merely pleasant. It appears to be biologically generative. The nervous system in silence is not idle. It is, in some deeper sense, rebuilding. Research on the long-term trajectory of well-being has found that inner peace, for most people, increases with age, not despite the accumulation of difficulty, but partly because of it. Studies following individuals across decades have found that older adults report higher emotional well-being, greater equanimity, and more consistent positive affect than younger adults, despite facing objectively more loss. Researchers have proposed several mechanisms: the prioritization of meaningful relationships over achievement, a more realistic relationship with mortality, and the gradual learning, through repeated experience, that most difficulties pass. Time, it seems, teaches peace, not automatically, but to those who remain willing to learn. The experience of deep physical rest, the body fully heavy, breath slow, eyes closed in the dark, has been identified as a restorative state independent of sleep. Yoga Nidra, a guided practice sometimes called yogic sleep, produces measurable reductions in cortisol, decreases in heart rate, and brainwave patterns similar to those of deep sleep, even in participants who remain conscious. This means that even on nights when sleep proves elusive, the deliberate choice to rest, to simply lie still, to breathe slowly, to let the body be heavy, offers something real and restorative. Inner peace, the evidence now shows clearly, is not the key to a life without difficulty. It is something different, something both more humble and more enduring. It is the capacity to remain in contact with one's own steadiness, even as circumstances move, even as loss accumulates, even as uncertainty continues. Inner peace is not the absence of thought. It is the quiet space between thoughts where the mind finally rests. This is the big idea at the center of everything we've explored tonight. Not a destination, not an achievement. A way of returning to breath, to body, to the present room, again and again, as many times as it takes. You might be feeling tired now. That's perfectly fine. Breathe slowly. Feel the cycles. Your breath rises and falls. Your heart moves in its steady rhythm. The body has been doing this your entire life, in sleep and waking, without your assistance or instruction. You don't need to hold on to anything tonight. Let everything settle in its own perfect order, like water finding its level, like a breath that has reached its natural end and simply lets go. We're almost there now. Peace is not a single state. Research on positive emotion describes a family of related experiences: contentment, calm, serenity, ease. Each is slightly different in quality. All point in the same direction. What they share is a sense of sufficiency, the feeling that right now, nothing more is needed. The body recognizes this long before the mind finds language for it. The slight relaxation of the jaw, the softening around the eyes, the breath that comes a little slower without being asked. The body at rest heals in ways the waking body cannot. Tissues repair. Inflammation quiets. The immune system moves through its gentle inspections, identifying and addressing what needs attention. Growth hormone is released during deep sleep. Not childhood growth alone, but the constant cellular maintenance that keeps the body resilient. Rest is not the absence of activity. It is a different and necessary kind, one the body has been waiting for, with extraordinary patience. Researchers studying long-lived communities around the world, the so-called blue zones, found that a shared characteristic across Okinawa, Sardinia, and other regions was a daily practice of deliberate downshift. Not sleep, but a chosen pause in the day's activity. A moment to stop, to sit, to let the pace of the world move without following it. Small but consistent. Available to everyone. The mind in deep meditation produces theta brainwaves, the same slow electrical oscillations present in the moments just before sleep. In this state, the brain's self-monitoring systems quiet, and the boundary between self and surroundings begins to soften slightly. Many people describe it as a sense of expansion. The worried self, with its lists and unresolved questions, becomes briefly smaller. Something older and steadier comes forward. Research on compassion fatigue, the depletion experienced by those who care deeply for others, has found that inner peace is not a luxury for caregivers. It is a resource. Those who maintain practices of renewal, rest, reflection, genuine time alone, sustain their capacity to give far longer than those who do not. Giving from fullness, researchers observe, is simply more sustainable than giving from empty. The Japanese concept of ikigai, often translated as a reason for being, describes the overlap between what one loves, what one is good at, what the world needs, and what one can be sustained by. Research on ikigai has found strong associations between this sense of purpose and lower mortality rates, higher reported well-being, and more consistent feelings of inner peace. Purpose appears to anchor the nervous system, giving the wandering mind somewhere meaningful to return to. Studies on the relationship between inner peace and time perspective have found that people who can hold all three time frames, past, present, and future, with relative equanimity, tend to have higher well-being. Those overly anchored in a difficult past suffer regret. Those overly focused on an uncertain future suffer anxiety. Those who rest primarily in the present tend to experience more consistent calm. The present is where peace lives. The past and future are where it most often goes missing. Gentle touch, a hand on the shoulder, a slow, self-administered massage, even the weight of a blanket, activates oxytocin and reduces cortisol through pathways that bypass conscious thought entirely. The nervous system responds to safe, gentle pressure as it responds to safety itself, by releasing, softening, settling. This is one of the reasons weighted blankets have gained clinical support for anxiety and sleep disturbance. The body is always listening for signals of safety. Touch, offered gently, is one of the clearest signals available. Research on the experience of enough, the felt sense of sufficiency, of having what is actually needed, has found it to be one of the most consistent predictors of calm and life satisfaction. Enough is not a quantity. It is a relationship, a way of relating to what is present, rather than measuring it against what might be. The person who has learned to feel enough tends to find peace available in more ordinary moments than the person always reaching for more. The sound of rain, steady, soft, without variation in intent, is one of the most universally reported sleep and calm inducers across cultures. Researchers have proposed that it functions as white noise, masking environmental disruptions, and as a form of natural rhythmic entrainment. But there may be something additional. Rain is a sound that asks nothing. It falls without agenda, without address, without expectation. The nervous system, in its presence, can simply be still. Research on the neuroscience of music and emotion has found that listening to music one finds beautiful activates the same neural reward circuits as food, warmth, and social connection. Music that moves us, genuinely, physically moves us, producing what researchers call chills, releases dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. The brain responds to beauty as if it were sustenance, and in some functional sense, it may be. Beauty, reliably encountered, appears to be one of the quieter nourishments of the peaceful mind. The sense of psychological safety, the baseline felt sense that the world is basically manageable and that one is not in immediate danger, has been found in attachment research to be among the most powerful predictors of mental health and inner peace. This sense of safety is not the absence of threat. It is the presence of trust. Trust in oneself, in at least some others, and in the basic continuity of experience. Where trust lives, peace tends to follow. In the deepest stages of sleep, brain activity slows to its quietest patterns. Delta waves, the slowest of the brain's electrical oscillations, move through the cortex in long, unhurried waves. In this state, there is no narrative, no self to protect, no problem to solve. The brain is simply present, in the most complete sense of the word. Researchers sometimes describe slow-wave sleep as the closest the conscious mind comes to pure, effortless peace, the state the breath and body were always moving toward. All along tonight, research on the relationship between humility and inner peace has found that people who hold themselves with less rigidity, who can acknowledge limitation without collapse, and receive feedback without threat, report more consistent well-being and less chronic anxiety. Humility, in this sense, is not self-diminishment. It is accuracy. It is a realistic relationship with one's own size and significance, neither inflated nor deflated. The humble mind carries less to defend, and defending less finds it easier to rest. Could inner peace be a skill rather than a gift? The research, by this point, has answered with a quiet and consistent yes. People who practice, who return, repeatedly and without drama, to breath, to body, to presence, develop measurably greater calm over time. The skill is not complicated. It is simply repeated. Like any practice, it deepens with use. The peace available at the end of a long practice is not different in kind from what was available at the beginning. It is simply more familiar, easier to find in the dark. The brain in the moments before sleep releases adenosine, a chemical that accumulates during waking hours and creates the sensation of tiredness. As adenosine levels rise, alertness falls, and the nervous system begins its gradual shift toward rest. This is not a failure of willpower. It is biology doing exactly what it was designed to do. The sleepiness you feel right now is not weakness. It is your body's most eloquent signal. It is time. Studies on contentment, as distinct from happiness, have found it to be a more stable and more accessible state. Happiness tends to depend on events. Contentment depends on orientation. It is quieter, less dramatic, more available. The contented person does not need things to go particularly well. They need only, in this moment, to be reasonably at peace with how things are. Right now, in this room, in this quiet, that orientation is available. It always has been. Research on the effects of repetitive, rhythmic activity, rocking, swaying, gentle humming, has found these behaviors universally soothing across cultures and developmental stages. Infants are soothed by rocking. Adults are calmed by walking, by knitting, by the gentle back and forth of a swing. Rhythm appears to be one of the nervous system's oldest forms of self-regulation, older than language, older than thought. The breath, in its steady rhythm, belongs to this same ancient family of calming patterns. The experience of being in a darkened room, light reduced, stimulation low, activates the pineal gland's release of melatonin and signals the brain towards sleep. But darkness does something else too. It reduces the constant sensory input that keeps the mind busy and outward-facing. In the dark, there is less to respond to. The attention, without external objects to rest on, turns gently inward. And inward, if the conditions are right, is exactly where peace tends to wait. Research consistently suggests that what distinguishes people who report inner peace from those who do not is rarely circumstance, income, health status, or relationship status. What appears instead is a quality of relationship with oneself, developed through practice, through experience, or through necessity. Not to escape, not to optimize, not to improve. Simply to be present, without demand, in their own lives. The peace was not elsewhere. It was here. It was always here. Somewhere right now. The breath is moving on its own. Without instruction, without effort. Simply rising and falling, as it has done since the first moment of your life. This breath is the oldest continuous thread of your experience. And it is present, right now. As you lie here in the quiet, there is nothing required of you. The breath continues. Peace continues. You simply rest inside it. The quiet is not empty. It holds every fact we've traveled through tonight, every finding about the nervous system, every study about acceptance, every word about the body's wisdom. All of it settles now, below language, into something softer and more enduring. The mind that has traveled this far has already arrived somewhere. It may not have a name for it. That's perfectly fine. Rest is its own form of understanding. What the mind cannot resolve through analysis, the body sometimes resolves through stillness. What worry cannot untangle, sleep sometimes quietly rearranges by morning. There is a kind of knowing that belongs to rest. Not the sharp clarity of insight, but something slower and gentler and more trustworthy. The sleeping mind works in ways the waking mind cannot follow. That is enough. That is more than enough. The space between thoughts is always there. It does not go anywhere. However dense the traffic of the day's concerns, the gaps are present. Brief, perhaps, but there. Inner peace is not built in those gaps. It is recognized in them. The practice is simply the repeated recognition. Here is a gap. Here is a breath. Here is a moment in which nothing is required and everything, briefly, is still. This moment, and this one, and this. The key to inner peace is not a key at all. It is a returning, a willingness to come back, again and again, to the quiet that was always present, beneath the noise, beneath the worry, beneath the long lists and the unresolved questions. Inner peace is not the absence of thought. It is the quiet space between thoughts where the mind finally rests. And you are in that space right now. You have been moving toward it all evening. You have arrived. And so, our quiet journey through the science and nature of inner peace comes to a gentle close. We've traveled from the amygdala's alarm, the brain forever scanning, forever preparing, to the slow delta waves of deep rest, where nothing needs protecting and everything simply is. We wandered through the nervous system's pathways to calm, through the wisdom of acceptance and forgiveness and presence, through the ancient and the newly discovered, all pointing in the same direction. From the rhythm of a single breath to the spaciousness that opens between thoughts, we've glimpsed how peace is both the smallest possible thing and the largest. It is a quality of attention, a practiced returning, a gentle, repeatable act. Inner peace reminds us that the most enduring things are often the quietest. Much of what we seek happens in stillness, in the space after a breath is released, in the moment a thought is allowed to pass without being followed, in the simple act of choosing, tonight, to rest. It reveals a patience the nervous system has always carried. Without permission to be still, it waits. By pausing to notice, we give it what it needed all along. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can, as deep as possible. Think about consciousness itself, yours, mine, everyone listening in their own quiet dark, all awareness everywhere, perhaps all connected in ways we don't yet understand. You are not alone in the universe of minds. Let your entire being dissolve into the ocean of consciousness, into dreamless rest, into the space before thought. Prepare for deep sleep. No boundaries left. Only peace. Perhaps this thoughtful exploration of inner peace brought you relaxation, rest, or quiet recognition tonight. A gentle like and subscribe helps other sleepless souls discover this peaceful space too. It only takes a moment, but it means the world to us. One quiet tap, one sleepy soul at a time. But there's no need to do anything now. Nothing at all. You've traveled far tonight, farther than most journeys take you. You can allow these thoughts of inner peace to fade now, like breath dissolving into open air, leaving only the softest calm behind. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier, as if the earth itself has gently decided to hold you a little closer tonight. If sleep comes, let it carry you like still water rising, smoothly, inevitably, into a realm where time and weight no longer matter. If your eyes are still open, the next video is waiting for you, ready to continue the journey. But if they're closed, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm. Tomorrow, the breath will still be rising. The quiet will still be present. The space between thoughts will still be waiting, as it always has. But tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, dear listener. And remember, the peace you are looking for has never been somewhere else. It was here, in this breath, in this quiet, in this moment, all along. Fall asleep to gentle facts, where science meets sleep. Dream deeper with sleepy science. Relax, listen, and drift into sleep. Good night.